As we approach this upcoming rate cut, the Fed is in a wait-and-see mode. They are prioritizing data over speculation. Powell's cautious tone aims to balance inflation control with economic stability. In 2024, Jerome Powell promised higher for longer rates, but by July 2025, his own Fed colleagues are revolting. Why are demanding cuts now, and was Powell lying, or did he see this coming all along? Today, we expose the real reason Powell's holding firm and how this 2024 interview proves he knew this would happen. Let's dive in.
Jerome Powell, the chair of the Federal Reserve, may have just rescued the economy from inflation without throwing millions out of work. When Americans were suffering through the highest inflation in 40 years, Powell's Fed raised interest rates 11 times to cool the economy. Economists expected a recession, but now inflation is tumbling while employment is near a 50-year high. Thursday, we met Powell for a rare interview to talk about interest rates, remaining dangers, and the one question that's on everyone's mind. Is inflation dead?
I wouldn't go quite so far as that. What I can say is that inflation has come down really over the past year and fairly sharply over the past 6 months. We're making good progress. The job is not done, and we're very much committed to making sure that we fully restore price stability for the benefit of the public.
The Fed's messaging shapes market expectations, interest rates, and business decisions. The Fed wants to avoid the mistakes of the 1970s by cutting too early, which leads to inflation spikes. The Fed wants sustainable 2% inflation, not just temporary dips. However, in 2025, inflation did cool further in early 2025, but the Fed waited for over 6 months of stable data before cutting.
You've avoided a recession. Why not cut the rates now?
Well, we have a strong economy. Growth is going on at a solid pace. The labor market is strong, 3.7% unemployment. With the economy strong like that, we feel like we can approach the question of when to begin to reduce interest rates carefully. And we want to see more evidence that inflation is moving sustainably down to 2%. We have some confidence in that. Our confidence is rising. We just want some more confidence before we take that very important step of beginning to cut interest rates.
The Fed can afford to be patient because they want to avoid in the market overreaction, which resulted in stocks rallying every time a cut was hinted. In 2023, since this interview, the Fed has finally cut rates in Q1 2025, primarily after core PCE fell to 2.3%. Pre-2020, low inflation was driven by globalization, cheap labor, and tech-driven productivity. Pre-2020, deglobalization and supply chains and trade wars raised costs. Demographic shifts, aging workforce, along with wage pressures, forced the shift to happen. Climate policies and energy transitions equals inflammatory pressure. The Fed reality is a 2% neutral rate may no longer be enough to keep inflation stable.
We just want to see
Inflation has fallen from just over 9% to about 3%, near the Fed's ultimate goal of 2%. Why is your target rate 2%?
Interest rates will always include an estimate of future inflation. If that estimate is 2%, that means you'll have 2% more that you can cut in interest rates. The central bank will have more ammunition, more power to fight a downturn if rates are a little bit higher.
Are you committed to getting all the way to 2.0 before you cut the rates?
No, that's not what we say at all. No. We're committed to returning inflation to 2% over time. I've said that we wouldn't wait to get to 2% to cut rates.
The Fed has made tremendous strides in reining in inflation from its peak of 9.1% in June of 2022 to 2.9% in December of 2024. But as the saying goes, the last mile is often the hardest. We did see the CPI drop to a low of 2.4% in September of 2024 before it ticked back up to 3% in January of 2025. Essentially, the CPI has been moving sideways to a higher high for a few months. And when you exclude food and energy costs, inflation has been stuck at 3.2 to 3.3% for the past 7 months.
It's every 6 weeks or so to set the so-called federal funds interest rate, which influences most loans. Last week, Powell announced the rate would stay at its 23-year high, about 5.5%, unchanged for 6 months. You disappointed a lot of people on Wednesday.
I can't overstate how important it is to restore price stability, by which I mean inflation is low and predictable, and people don't have to think about it in their daily lives. That's where we were for 20 years. We want to get back to that.
Moving too soon would set off inflation again.
You could, or you could just halt the progress. I think more likely, if you move too soon, you'd see inflation settling out somewhere well above our 2% target.
And what is the danger of moving too late?
If you move too late, then policy would be too tight, and that could easily weigh on economic activity and on the labor market.
Maybe a recession.
Right, and we have to balance those two risks. There is no, easy, simple, obvious path.
Was the Fed too slow to recognize inflation in 2021?
So in hindsight, it would have been better to have tightened policy earlier. We thought that the economy was so dynamic that it would fix itself fairly quickly, and we thought that inflation would go away fairly quickly without an intervention by us. And so in the fourth quarter of 21, it became clear that inflation was not transitory in the sense that I mentioned, and we pivoted and started tightening. And as I said, it's essential that we did that. It was critical that we did that, and that's part of the story why inflation's coming down now.
The pressure on Fed Chair Jerome Powell to resign and change course is coming from both parties, but for different reasons. The Democrats claim he hurt Joe Biden's 2024 election, which resulted in young voters being priced out of the ability to afford homes. It also slowed down the job sector, which caused a stagnation in tech and construction. The Republicans claim Jerome Powell is too slow to cut because small business donors complain about loan rates. The high rates equal higher interest on U.S. debt, which equals $1 trillion a year. They claim they may lose the 2026 midterms because of economic pain, which would cost them the Congress. Donald Trump has been one of Jerome Powell's most vocal critics, and his anger stems from a mix of political, economic, and personal grievances. Trump blames Powell for hurting the 2024 election. He believes the Fed aggressively raised rates to fight inflation, which Trump claims slow economic growth before the 2024 election. Trump hates independent Fed policy. Trump wanted 0% interest rates forever. He pushed Powell to cut rates, even during the 2018-2019 boom. Trump quotes Powell as a weak and pathetic man who doesn't have a clue. The Fed should be working for America, not against it.
Back in 2021, little seemed good. Inflation ignited after pandemic disruptions and when the federal government spent $5 trillion to keep the economy afloat. Many in Congress questioned Powell's rapid rate increases and predicted disaster.
And I hope you'll reconsider that as you drive this, before you drive this economy off a cliff. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
But strangely, when rates went up, the economy added more than 5 million jobs. Powell told us that's because of the odd dynamics of the pandemic. Car sales, for example.
There was a semiconductor shortage because so many people were buying goods that involved a lot of semiconductors. So while demand for cars was spiking because people didn't want to ride public transportation, for example, and they're moving to the suburbs, while that's happening, you can't get semiconductors, you can't make cars. So there's a shortage. So what happened is inflation just spiked. But as the semiconductor supply came back, the inflation has moderated a great deal. So these unique features of the pandemic did reverse in a way that brought inflation down.
In Jerome Powell's answer, he believes the economy is resilient. He sees the future as a soft landing for the American economy. As of now, he warns of commercial real estate and regional banks are at risk. The Fed believes high rates haven't broken the economy. This year's verdict so far, there has been no recession. Small banks have struggled, which caused them to close their doors, but the major banks like J.P. Morgan, Wells Fargo, and Goldman Sachs are steady plunging forward.
I have the sense this worries you very much.
Over the long run, of course it does. You know, we're borrowing from future generations. It's time for us to get back to putting a priority on fiscal sustainability, and sooner is better than later.
What would you say is the single most important factor for the future of American prosperity?
With your permission, I'll name two things. One is, I think we need to just remember that we have this dynamic, innovative, flexible, adaptable economy, more so than other countries. And this is the big reason why our economy has come through so well. The other thing I'll point to for the United States is really since World War II, the United States has been the indispensable nation supporting and defending democracy, security arrangements, economic arrangements. We've been the leading voice on that, and it is clear that the world wants that. And I would want the United States to know, people in the United States to know that this has benefited our country enormously. It benefits our economy so much to have this role. And I hope that continues.
Jerome Powell has about 2 years in his current term as chairman. He suggested to us the likely time for the first interest rate cut would be the middle of the year, a few months before the election. Your decisions inevitably are going to have a bearing on this year's election. And I wonder, to what degree does politics determine your timing?
We do not consider politics in our decisions. We never do, and we never will. It's not easy to get the economics of this right in the first place. These are complicated, risk-balancing decisions. If we tried to incorporate a whole nother set of factors in politics into those decisions, it could only lead to worse economic outcomes. So we simply don't do that, and we're not going to do it. We haven't done it in the past, and we're not going to do it now.
There are people watching this interview who are skeptical about that.
I would just say this. Integrity is priceless. And at the end, that's all you have. And we plan on keeping ours.
In conclusion, Powell's message was patience. Watch for CPI reports, job data reports, and wage trends. These would dictate Fed moves. The Feds are in a new era, which means volatility is the price of stability. Cheap money is gone. Just last night, Donald Trump criticized Jerome Powell for his refusal to lower rates, and he has called on the central banks and their board members to act. He claims our rates should be 3 points lower than they are, saving us $1 trillion per year as a country. He believes Jerome Powell is too stubborn, and he doesn't get it. And he never did and never will. The board should act, but they don't have the courage to do so, Trump wrote on his social media platform. So in the end, will Jerome Powell bow to political pressure and risk inflation, or hold steady and stay independent but take the heat? Please like, subscribe, share, and comment. Peace.